Hi everyone, Angelo here, and it's the fourth Sunday in Ordinary Time. So we're continuing along in our journey, and we're about halfway through the first chapter of Mark at this point. And we have Jesus making his way all throughout Galilee, and here we have him in Capernaum. So the Sabbath comes, and the rabbi goes to do what the rabbi does. He goes to the synagogue to teach. In his being there, he encounters the evil spirit or the unclean spirit, who identifies him as the Holy One of God and saying, what you want to do with we? And Christ heals the person of the evil spirit, and it astonishes people because they question who is this person and what is this new authority that he teaches with. You know, one of the things I really appreciate about the Gospel of Mark is that, okay, for example, in this story, Jesus is compared to the scribes. And I mean, we know the scribes, we know the Pharisees, the religious leaders, the religious scholars of the time of Jesus. But it makes me look at my own self, and I imagine for many of you who are watching as well, chances are if we existed back in Jesus' time, we would have ended up there because we are the religious leaders, the religious scholars of today. So I always stop and I wonder, will I or would I have facilitated the work of God, or would I have stopped it in the name of, I don't know, let's say orthodoxy, right? Because as we are very familiar with, Jesus and the religious leaders are often held in opposition to each other. Or we could say that they were held in creative tension, however the case might be, however we want to look at it. So I really appreciate that Mark puts this in this way because it at least helps me to really kind of stop and think, okay, what am I doing? And try to maintain some sort of balance. But then we have Jesus teaching with this new authority, well, new to the people, right? And they're talking about him all over the place and spreading his reputation all throughout. And it makes me wonder, what authority do we now teach with? Because what the scribes would have done is very similar to what we do now. You know, the scribes would have quoted this teacher and this scholar who would have looked into this story and had this interpretation. I mean, very similar to us, right? We look to each other, especially saints and scholars from, past centuries, in order to try to deliver a good case. So it makes me wonder, what authority do we teach with? And I think this is particularly on my mind because last week I would have been at the symposium. It was a joint effort between the local seminary, that's St. John Vianney and the Uganda Martyrs, and the theology group that I'm a part of, which is the CTCT, the Conference on Theology in the Caribbean Today. And in this seminar, we had two speakers. One is Monsignor Patrick Anthony, fondly known as Papa, who is actually one of the co-founders of the theology group. And then we have Stephanie Baldeo Singh, who she is a student at the seminary, also part of the theology group too. So Papa gave his thoughts on this document that Pope Francis would have put out in November. Let me see if I can say this. Ad Theologum Promovendum. But essentially it's a document where the Pope was asking for theology to be more contextual rather than abstract and detached from human experience. So Pava shared his thoughts on that and his experience because Pava is a living legend, especially in the region. And then Stephanie, as young rising star, gave her thoughts on it as well and a response to what Pava would have said. And I look at these two people in particular, and I think anybody who knows them personally will agree with me when I say that these two embody Christ. Like legit. They powerful, both dynamite in their own way, both super humble and both super down to earth too. Really, if anybody is Christ among us walking, is these two. And of course, it's not just limited to these two, but because they were the presenters last week, these are who I'm currently focusing on. And Papa, when he was talking, would have talked about how, okay, yes, there's this call for theology to be contextual, but we in the Caribbean been doing this for years. And I mean, even I myself, and I'm gonna lie, when I saw this document come out in November, I kind of bypassed it because I was like, why does this need to be said? I mean, I thought this was already a given because at least when I was doing my studies at Barry, both at the undergrad and the grad level, I mean, yes, we established that, okay, there was this thing called classical theology, but that, proper theology cannot be divorced of human experience. It cannot be divorced of context. Like, theology necessarily needs to be contextual. So I figured this was a given. I mean, I figured since Vatican II, this, like, we all get that. I didn't realize it was something that needed to be said. But, I look at Papa and I look at Stephanie and the way they spoke and, how they would talk about their own spiritual giants and the work that they do. And they always brought it back to the human experience. I mean, Stephanie in particular, who talked about this integration and wholeness. So I would like to hope and believe that when we do teach, we try our best to not teach as individuals, but rather to teach in the form of persons as part of a community. I mean, for us as Christians, it will be persons in the body of Christ. But this story also makes me think that teachers have a golden opportunity / golden responsibility. Because here in the story, we have Jesus goes to teach, but heals in the process. And it makes me believe that all teachers, I mean, at any level, whether it's school teachers, catechists, parents and grandparents, anybody, anyone who teaches also has the ability to bring that healing to those that they teach, those that they journey with. And I think that's a real blessing, and I think that's something that should not be taken for granted. And it's something we should definitely cherish and expound upon, right? Like, when we step into wherever the case might be, I mean, for me, it might be the classroom. How can we bring not just knowledge, but more so, how can we bring healing, togetherness, unity, community? And, one other thing I look at too, I was reading this book by Feen Perkins. She is one of the most well-respected theologians, especially when it comes to the Bible. And, Perkins has a quote or a sentence along the lines of, when it comes to the Gospel of Mark prepares the reader to expect a form of teaching in all the controversy of the stories. And if we think about theology, meaning we need to reflect on our faith, we trying to understand our faith seeking understanding, as we are very familiar with. When we look at our lives, whose life doesn't have a bunch of controversy in it? So same way too that Jesus, like, we are able to find teachings of Jesus in the controversy of the stories. It just makes me wonder, what do we get to learn from the controversies of our life? I mean, if there's anyone who has no controversy in their life, please share the secret, because I'm sure we'd all love to know. But I just don't think that controversy can be avoided. But that's fine, because we could hear the voice of God in that controversy. So, I mean, a lot of times it'll get difficult. A lot of times it'll be hard. A lot of times it'll be heartbreaking, especially when it comes to the more controversial things of our life. It might feel like a very disenchanting experience. It might feel like it's tearing us apart. And I mean, all that is true, yes. But the same way that The Spirit of God would have hovered over the waters of creation and brought order and calm to all the chaos. The same way, too, the Spirit now still with us. That same Spirit of God is still with us. So, what are we hearing God saying to us in the controversies of our own life when we reflect on our own experience, on our own day-to-day lives? What is God saying to us? And not just what is God saying to us, meaning not just what we learn, what is the healing that we are experiencing? And how could we then help bring that healing to others as well? I mean, if anything, we are just seekers on this path, trying to understand our faith. And like I often say, none of us have the answers, at least not by ourselves. But when we come together and we talk and we have discussions and we share, we are able to have a deeper understanding of what God is saying to us. So, as I wrap up this week, I would just like to ask us to contemplate and reflect. I mean, I definitely will be. What is God saying to us in the controversy of our lives? Anyway, that's it from me. I'll see you all next week. As always, thank you.